My lords, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, within the framework of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies series, we have been interviewing experts, including diplomats, academics, and religious leaders, discussing with them the issues at stake in Palestine as a whole, especially in the last 2-3 months. And today, we are delighted to be hosting one of the leading European ambassadors of our time, His Excellency Michel Raimbaud, who is a distinguished French ambassador, as well as an academic, a professor in several French institutions, in addition for being one of our board members. Your Excellency, Michel Raimbaud, we are delighted to be having you today in our program. And if I could kindly start by asking you to deliver your own statement about European policies towards the Arab world in general, and then we can have a spontaneous discussion. So the podium is yours, and please, the mic as well is yours.
So thank you very much, Mr. Makram. I am delighted to be received at your program, at this conference, and I will do my best to be interactive and to be successful in my intervention. That is, of course, my personal intervention. Thank you very much anyway. I am pleased and I am delighted and very honored to take part in your program. So I will start from the very beginning. Invoking the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in August 1789, France claims to be a pioneer. At the same time, referring to the unanimous declaration on the 4th of July 1776, when they proclaimed their independence recognized by the Paris Treaty 1783, the United States of America claims likewise to be a vanguard. When brandishing their Western-style models, both of them should be modest. But the West is anything but modest. It has been convinced for 5 centuries that it embodies the quintessence of humanity, or even the only humanity that really matters. A refined world facing the barbarians, then the Catholic Christianity facing the infidels or henchmen of the devil. Later, the free world facing the totalitarians. It carried on with its competition for virtue as axis of good following the fall of the evil empire on December Christmas 1991, when Washington triumphantly imposed its own hegemony. The West ended up in recent years as the civilized world facing the surrounding jungle. Accustomed to writing history and defining the rules of the international games, the West was convinced to be indispensable until it discovered it was not. 90% of humanity dreaming of discarding its supervision and double standards policy. Human rights and freedom is indeed a pretext. Greek democracies, like ours, claim to be exemplary in terms of rights and freedoms, burdened with certainties, values, and rules, sure of their superiority. They endlessly denounce the pariah states, failed states, rogue states. This is the surest way to avoid being put in danger. Westerners, blind to their own deficiencies, are merciless for the states of concern that surround them, their violations of human rights and freedom. As regards breaches of international law so frequently mentioned, it is clear that this historic compromise with the Soviet Union, codified at the end of World War II by the San Francisco Charter, has become just unbearable to our West, which ended up developing on the sly rules and decreeing values, which assured the West a moral soft power above all suspicion. The collective West, the United States, the Anglo-Saxon bloc, AUKUS, the Israeli clone, as well as the honorary Westerners like Japan and South Korea, was able to make its hegemony outstanding in a class of one's own, but it ended up being on bad terms with the whole humanity. His wrath is reflected in incessant warnings, regime change operations, democratic bombings, are relayed by these sanctions and illegal measures of which the West has made a monopoly. The bankruptcy of international law is at the origin of the ruin of human rights. It is in the name of democracy, freedoms, respect for human rights that countless wars of aggressions have been and are still perpetrated by the West. The United States has launched 400 armed interventions since its creation in 1776 until today, until nowadays, including approximately 250 since World War II. We have been able to count more than 100 conflicts or wars since the end of the Cold War in 1991 in the greater Middle East alone, including all the Arab Springs, which, under the signs of Leo Strauss' constructive chaos, aim to make the greater Middle East Western compatible and Israeli compatible. According to a professor at Tufts University, Monica Duffy, U.S. Special Forces are currently deployed in more countries than their ambassadors, continually starting new wars in order to promote peace, I presume. Those wars constitute crimes par excellence in the hierarchy established by the Nuremberg Court, classic or hybrid by proxies, blockade, embargoes, sanctions, coercive measures whose effectiveness is boosted by the extraterritoriality of American laws. These wars, undeclared, undermine the rights of states and peoples. They are accompanied by massive violations of human rights, women's rights, and children's rights. With their web of war crimes and crimes against humanity, they would constitute genocides or attempted genocides, punishable by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, if they were referred to. This has never happened for Western crime until today. These arrogant ladies or gentlemen are never requested to give account. Showered with honors, they write their memoirs, give well-paid conferences like Tony Blair, pay titleship like Bush. Centenarians, they continue to whisper in presidents' ears like Henry Kissinger, Great man of the century for the worshipper of America and the greatest war criminal in the opinion of human rights defenders. We cannot minimize this radical split between the collective West and the global South, guided by Russia, China, Iran, which brings together the majority of humanity and expects nothing more, nothing from its adversary except its collapse. Unaware of their isolation, Westerners seem indifferent to this risk of conflagration, ignoring diplomacy, negotiation, peace, etc., etc. Violating international law, they violated their commitments. Who would trust them? I will talk right now about Joe Biden's two wars. We readily recall the exploits of Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Bill Clinton, rarely Obama, Nobel Peace winner, who is at the origin of the countless wars in the years 2008 and 2016. We had forgotten his vice, which came back to the surface after Donald Trump proclaiming that America must guide the world again and opening to additional fronts. I am talking about Joe Biden. On October the 20th, 2023, last October, Joe Biden launched its second message to the nation from the White House. This morning, he started like that. This morning I returned from Israel, etc., etc., etc. The assault on Israel echoes 20 months of war, of tragedy, brutality since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Hamas and Putin are different threats, but they similarly want to destroy a neighboring democracy, Ukraine and Israel. Hamas wants the destruction of Israel and the killing of the Jewish people. Putin denies the existence and statehood of Ukraine. These conflicts may seem distant, but they are linked. Ensuring the success of Israel and Ukraine is vital to our national security. Those are Biden's words. The Western doctrine never approaches the question in its entirety, which would highlight that the aggressor is not who you think. The Ukrainian war did not begin on February 22, 2022, with Russia's special operation, but in 2014 with the Maidan coup blatantly fomented by the United States, covered by France and Germany, whose leaders, Hollande and Merkel, admitted their inaction remotely controlled from Washington after the Minsk II agreements. Likewise, the history of the war between the Palestinians and Israel did not begin on October 7th, last 2023 in Gaza. And it's not a war of Hamas against Israel. The Palestinian resistance was assimilated by the Zionist regime to the Islamist movement for well-known reasons. In reality, the third uprising, the Intifada, involves Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the FPLP, and various factions of the PLO. It's a mere episode of a 75 years ongoing war since the creation of Israel in 1948. The partition plan that was imposed by the United Nations had been a legal vote under pressure, but legal. But for Palestinians dispossessed of their land, the plan was quite illegitimate. Tortured by their remorse following the Holocaust and fearing the future, the Europeans found it easier to make pay for their monstrous crimes the Palestinians who had absolutely nothing to do with it. By the way, people, I will mention that the people occupied, colonized, or subjected to apartheid has an absolute right to fight defense and to fight against the oppressor by all means. In international law, the concept of terrorism does not exist at all. With its procession of wars, 1948, 56, 67, 73, including in Lebanon and Gaza, with annexations, colonization, repression, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has never stopped. Created by the United Nations resolutions, the Zionist state has ignored countless resolutions of the Security Council. 260 are recorded, and the General Assembly, the same number, benefiting from total impunity ensured by the American, French, or British veto. Palestinian rights have been continuously and shamelessly violated. 75 years later, the Palestinians unleashed the flood of Al-Aqsa against usurpation, occupation, colonization, and apartheid. A repression based on massive and indiscriminate bombings fell on Gaza, making the largest open-air prison on the planet, the biggest concentration camp for 2.4 million people, over 2 million of them wandering in a gigantic field of ruins. At mid-December, the Zionists had dumped the equivalent of 3 Hiroshima atomic bombs using prohibited weapons as white phosphorus, ninjas, etc., etc. According to the well-known historian Dylan Pape, in 1948, there was a very clear plan whose objective was to try to expel as many Palestinians as possible from as large a part of Palestine as possible. In fact, the State of Israel came into being, leading to the forced displacement of more than 800,000 Palestinians from their native lands. The Arab states had never been created. The territory devolved to it, being eaten away through wars, annexations, colonization, from 46 or 47 of Palestine to 6 or 7% today. The timetables provided by the Oslo or Madrid agreements have remained a dead letter. Some are proposing a return to the two-state solution. Allow me to dodge. The Israelis are not ready to negotiate and probably never have been. They want all of Palestine and even more if given the opportunity. Why would the Palestinians accept being trapped again? This war will accumulate hatred which should immunize them, the Palestinians, against past illusions. The genocide is underway in full view of the international community, claimed by its Israeli promoters, while the situation in the West Bank is slowly deteriorating. The project is to empty and make the Gaza Strip uninhabitable, an undertaking that has been passed over in silence due to the fear of the international community, or the so-called international community, regarding the untouchable Zionist power perpetrated by the descendants of the victims of the Holocaust. The genocide benefits from the full support of the West. It is supported by 94% of the Israeli who approve of the ethnic cleansing. The scandal hardly moves the elites of the Greek democracies, but has aroused impressive support for Palestine among peoples, including in the West. Sahel is at the standstill of the resistance resist. All the strategists will tell you what it means. At the geopolitical level, the big shift in the world is going on. All the fronts are flaring up. Israel is not, but Palestine is in the winner's camp. A deleterious impact on rights of freedoms in the collective West anyway. While our mainstream media do not hesitate in their news to dispatch the genocide in 1 minute between two playful subjects on the delights of Christmas and the 2024 Olympics, the information indicates rare servility. Since 2022, at the launching of the Russian special operation in Ukraine, the guests had to pay an entry ticket. The Palestinians had paid the since 2022, at the launching of the Russian special operation in Ukraine, the guests had to pay an entry ticket, calling Putin crazy or tyrannical, describing the Russian army as idiotic and obsolete, Zelensky as brilliant and democratic, and his army ultra efficient. Although the perspective evolved, the lies, the blackmail, the stupidity do remain. The gong of the Israel-Hamas war having served a lot of imposters. The new entry code is to recognize that Hamas is a terrorist group. Few of the interviewees refuse blackmail. Our countries are becoming residual democracies. The discourse masking a practice of stifling rights and freedoms, and the slide towards the totalitarian culture that our torchbearer of the Enlightenment held down in the jungle. The guests of the mainstream should know that October 7th, 2023, is the third Palestinian uprising against the permanent genocide carried out since 1948 with the support of the West, and masking its genocide and its support embodies an implicit participation in the genocide. See you when the International Criminal Court wakes up, or when the axis of good has lost the game. That's my conclusion.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this panoramic intervention, which included certainly international relations, international law, military interventions, if I may call them like this, as well as some issues relating to geopolitics and geoeconomics. May I kindly just try to break down the points that you have mentioned and ask you, first of all, to slightly explain to us about the American-European relations. We understand from your presentation that American policy is that of hegemonic approach. But how does America practically relate to Europe in order to implement its hegemonic policy?
Well, because I think, of course, that there is a very it's an ideologic business question. I think that between the United States of America and between the European Union or the European states in general and the rest of the West, there is not a normal relationship, and on the basis of international law, of international customs and rights and system. It's much more than well, an alliance. It's well, I think it's an I should say an hegemony of the United States over the other parts of the West, and the Western leaders are very. I'm not sure that they are conscious, but anyway, they're accepting, they're willing to remain under this hegemony of the United States, because I think that they feel alone quite unable to maintain their independence far from the United States. They have got accustomed to, for France, for example, I think that it was not the case at the time of General de Gaulle, and for a long time until, well, the beginning of the century. But after Jacques Chirac, after the first war of Iraq, there was this return to the internet, what President Sarkozy used to call the return to the international, to the Western community, to the Western bed, I should say. And right after, there was the notion of the European sovereignty, replacing the national independence. And then the notion, the famous nation of the couple between France and Germany, for example, that those, well, this image was cultivated by François Mitterrand. But I think that anyway, on the basics of this basis, that France renounced to its political independence and to its national sovereignty. That's the case. And that's the case for France. That's the case for Germany. That's the case for most of the countries, all the countries of Western Europe. I think that they feel quite, well, unable to maintain their independence without, well, keeping under the protection of America, of the United States. And of course, there is no explanation, but it's, well, an ideological support that goes to the neoconservatism and the Zionist pressure groups. Because I think that in the United States, it's well known that, well, the real government of the United States is the Zionist lobby, the deep state, the so-called deep states. But I think that it is true also, not only in Israel, but I think it is true in many, many countries of the West. Firstly, in France and other great European states. I explained the mechanism that led those countries to take this political line, but I think that it is still effective and it's very deeply rooted. And I think that we won't get rid of this, I should say, supervision for a long time. It would need independent government, but they are not independent government anymore. And they are not even conscious of the danger of the situation. They are not conscious of the evolution of the world at large at the geopolitical level. Right now, there is a big change in the order, the world order, and I think that the Westerners, the Western leaders, the Western elites are not conscious of that. The West on the one side, 10% of the population and 90% of the humanity against the West. That is the real balance. They are not conscious and they are ready to go to conflagration unconsciously. I think so.
Yeah, Your Excellency, may I kindly just again deconstruct what you have said? Am I right in thinking that you said that on the one hand, these leading European EU countries, they gave up their national independence in order to give it to a European leadership, but
Yes.
at the same time, once they have given up their national independence to this collective, the EU itself gave up its independence to the Americans.
Yes, that's right. But I think that that's the mistake of the French leaders, for example. They 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 have the impression or they had the illusion that well, the European Union could be a political entity, an independent political entity, but it is not. It has never been. I think that the European project is itself an American project on the Chinese project, and so it's well, it's hopeless, an hopeless enterprise. I think that France and the French government, from Sarkozy, Hollande, and Macron, the three last French presidents, cultivated the same illusions, these illusions of independence. But there is no European independence. Europe is not a state, is not a super state, and won't be a super state, I presume. It will be just a collection of, states, but that are linked closely at first, as if America were the central government of the European Union. And I think that for the time being, we've taken the decision in the name of Europe. It's not, they are not, the presidents are not talking, they are just following up. But who takes the decision is Ursula von Leyen, the president of the Commission. But she is not a president of the state, and she has no legality and so no legitimacy to take such decisions, to support Israel, to decide and to send and to make and to do. But they leave her do so. And so she is happy, of course, but well, they don't take care of the legality. They ignore quite the legality and the national uh, desire of most of the people that in Europe. That is true in France, that it's true in Germany, in all the other European countries. I think that the governments have got rid from the control of their people. So that is the reason why I talked about, well, it's fake democracies.
This is a very important point that I wanted to ask you about, but since you have mentioned it now, about the position of Ursula von der Leyen, on the one hand, she's neither president nor elected even, she's just appointed,
Appointed,
but
yes.
she is still, in fact, leading and deciding and taking decisions. On the other, so could you please just explain to us, could this be legally challenged anywhere?
Yes, of course, it's not a legal challenge. I think it's good for the time being. I think that nobody knows the solution for the time. We hope that in the framework of the big shift, geopolitical big shift in the world, that it will change the situation, because this situation cannot well be pursued for long. But for the time being, like that. I think that the expansion of the United Europe, of the European Union to the eastern countries is not making easier any change, because all those countries that were the popular democracies in the past have a very strong impulse to be, not independent countries, but members of the NATO, even more than members of the European Unions. And they are like, they are, there is no reasonable, choice and policies from their part. We, I think that they are constituting in the eyes of the American leaders and the American leadership, I think that the Eastern European countries are going to be the new Europe. The Western
if I
Europe
may,
is the old Europe.
right. If I may just ask so that we are clear about it, can her behavior, I'm talking about Ursula von der Leyen, can her behavior, decisions, political stances, can it be legally challenged as being illegal or not?
Yes, of course it could be, but it won't be. I suppose that, in France, and I'm talking about my country, but I think that it's quite the same in the other countries, especially in Western Europe, Western Europe. I think that there is a complicity, mm, and a deep complicity between the intellectuals, the politicians, the political people, and the medias, the mainstream, the so-called mainstream medias. And I think that there is unanimity about this policy towards the United States and this obedience to the United States. And I think that it won't change for the time being because I see no political party for the time being in France, but I don't see either not in other countries. On the contrary, we have quite an invasion of extremist parties that are parties not of their countries, but of the Occident, of the West, and the Western ideology of the alliance with the United States. And so I think that getting out from this status quo won't be very easy, but it will happen one of these days. And I am sure that that's the reason why I am referring to the big shift, the big geopolitical shift in the world, to think that, the European Union will not be able to resist to this big mutation in the world. I think even, I think that the continuation, the result or the issue to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians will end up in a very unexpected way or unexpected way. I think that they will win. The Palestinian resistance will win because they are on the side of the winner camps, and the Western governments and the American governments are not. When we listen to President Joe Biden, I think that's it's a tremendous stupidity. When I talk in some of the what his message to the American nation at the end of October, I think that was the second one during his mandate, was quite it was not not real. It was quite we were living in another planet. Well, his love for Israel, what he said about Israel and Hamas and etc. etc. I think anyway any dignified leader would not use these words or this way of speaking. It's very stupid. I think that he must retire.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you have pointed out characteristics or virtues such as dignity, but this leads me just in order to wrap up this point about the European Union. We understand that Ursula von der Leyen, she's German. She held several high positions in Angela Merkel's leadership or administration. Now she's an unelected president of the European Commission. And on the other hand, there is another personality, Joseph Borrell, who in fact leads the foreign policy. Could you tell us how the EU makes its decisions, at least with regards to foreign policy, please?
I don't understand, and I think that in fact nobody understands. We don't even try to understand what happens in our countries because it is so irreal that of course, the explanation, I think that for the time being, and well, taking into account what happens in the world, in Ukraine, in Palestine, or and this universal support to Israel for the time being, I see that you have not one country in the world that condemned really, not in words, but in facts and in deeds, the Israeli actions and the genocide that has been fomented by Israel in Palestine for the time being. I think that there was a complete silence by the international community at large, not the international Western community, but all the community of nations. I heard, for my part, as far as I am concerned, I heard no country at all, not one, even big or small, or in the or other, I didn't listen to, I didn't saw any country, any government condemning the government of Israel, and even, for example, you have private initiatives and private projects to complain about to refer to the international court. We have some initiatives, some project in France for some operations for the time being. It will be very complicated as far as the government didn't do anything until today. I think that's a pity, but it's like that. Not even the big power like Russia, like China. Well, of course, in words, but not a condemnation, a frank condemnation of the Israeli governments and behaviors, and not a condemnation of the genocide. I think that, of course, they are big powers, but and they have national interest, but they could have a national interest that, in conformity with the national interest, with the Palestinian interest, because in the traditional diplomacy, at the international level, the Palestinian problem was a problem for the progressive countries. For example, it was for the Soviet Union, let's say, for the democratic forces in the European countries. For the time being, it is not anymore. You have unanimity from the right to the left. In France, we have just one party that is taking position in favor clearly of the Palestinians against the government of Israel. It's Mélenchon, the leftist party. But it has taken time to come to this position, but it has, and he is a courageous man. For the rest, I think that everybody, is united in the communion to the support to Israel, or to a silence that is a French support for Israel. Nobody dares to express an idea that would be against this support to Israel. I think that
if I may just kindly ask you, why we see all of this European submissiveness to the United States? Why is the EU in particular submissive to the United States? After all, the EU includes huge countries, big economies. I mean, take Germany, take even the UK, take the colonial heritage. They were empires. I mean, how come the EU turned to be so submissive to the States, and why? Many people ask, Why is the EU submissive to the US?
I think that the only common point, well, is the love for America and the support and the link, well, that existing in many spirits in the West and European countries, the link with Israel. And this, you have this. I don't understand quite well, but I cannot explain very well. But I think that it is the only reason that in the deep states, especially in the deep states, or the influential powers in France and in Germany and the other European countries, in Britain and in all the European countries, are well in close union in this respect. I think that they feel a link to Israel. They think that the support to the state of Israel, to the Zionist state, is one common point that unites all the countries of the West. And with America, you have an alliance between America and Israel. That is what you know. And we have the same alliance between the European countries and Israel for the same reasons linked to the World War II and to the relation of the Western government to Islamism, to Islam, to the Arab countries, to the Arab Muslim countries. I think that they feel or they think they have a choice between the support to Israel and to support the Arab or Muslim countries. And I think that most of them, most in those, the media, the politicians, and the intellectuals, most of them do support, the support to Israel. I think that they are unable to encourage another option, I think.
But Ambassador, I mean, am I right in thinking that what you are saying is that the whatever call it, the Israeli administration, Zionist cause, Zionist lobby, call it whatever you wish, is in general Israel the glue between Europe and the United States solely? Are there any economic commercial interest between the EU and the United States that dictate this decision making? Is Israel the glue? If Israel is weakened, so will the relationship between America and the EU stop being that strong and submissive?
Between the European Union and America, it's a political. Of course, there is no economic interest. On the contrary, of course, America is playing its own game. The European countries are not playing their national games. I think that they have forgotten completely their national interest. They are just for most of them for the elites, for those intellectual politicians and mainstream medias. I think that there is just one rule is to be linked to the United States policy and to be linked to the Israeli. Israel is a glue between the United States and Europe, but there is no realistic, I think, explanations. I have no anyway. I would like to understand, because in my opinion, of course, it is clear that the European government were doing so what they do for the time being, and having this political line where they are not fighting for the national interest of the country they are responsible of. They are working against the national interest. I know it's true about France, about Germany. It's quite clear. We saw the same phenomenon, the two wars of, I call it Sleepy Joe's two last wars. That is in Ukraine and in Palestine. What you have seen I have seen in his message to the American nations, last message, the link that is close between the two wars. I think that is the explanation, the Biden's explanation. I think, in fact, it is accepted. This explanation that is stupid is deeply accepted by the European leaders, by the European intellectual, by the medias, most of them. And you know, we have a legislation. I mentioned in the last part of my intervention that lead step by step, we are just dumping, we are just plunge, getting down, well, all the steps from the democratic state to the totalitarian states. That is true. We have a censorship, we have a control of the government over the media, over the mainstream. We have, it doesn't look like, well, seen from, but I think that in Britain, but in France and Germany, in all the European countries, we have the same system, that the public opinions are requested to stay in the right line, in the mainstream line, and not to take another direction. It is true against Palestine. It is true against Russia. It is true in all the conflicts of this time. And it is. I think that the peoples of convictions feel obliged, more or less, to bend to the to these strong pressures of the government over to public opinion. Of
Okay,
course,
so if so, from the European side, from the side of the EU, who is benefiting from a pro-Israeli position in relations to America?
in relation to America, because I think that we have in all the European countries, but it's not a new thing, something new that happened in the last years. But for years and years and years, I think that America, the first weapon of America was the ideological weapons, were linked to Israel, and the American policy, and so on, so on, so. That's what we said. That's what I said just at the beginning of my intervention. I think that America tried took as soft the soft power. The American soft power was very, very, very strong, and it was played. It played in favor of the American influence over the country. You know, the American culture from Coca-Cola and I don't know what, and Coca-Cola to the writers to the American style, the American way of life, the American cultures is omnipresent, present in any place and in any moment of European life. And it is not new. It is not from this year or the last year. It has been like that for years and years and years. And it's very difficult to get rid from this perfect influence.
So
And I
there
think
is,
that the
so there
people
is
don't realize that they are under pressure of America.
So you are saying that there is a cultural and economic impact from the United States over the daily life of Europeans. But this leads me again to the question: is there somebody or some people in the EU who are benefiting from maintaining this? Is there a commercial interest that makes the EU countries that submissive to America?
In the economic field, no, I think no. Nobody, I think that the businessmen and the people that work in that sector cannot say that they find some positive result from this policy. But this is the policy of the government. I think that they're afraid of, plunging into something else, into changing their position. I think that they feel there is some kind of it is in the minds of the people, in the spirits of the people, not to change. I don't. It, well, they don't. It's not a very clever position, but it is the position that it's. We
No,
cannot. I
I
tried very
understand.
hardly to understand, but I try daily to understand what happens in my country. And
Yeah.
I am not alone to try to understand. We cannot understand.
Okay,
because
but
well,
let me just try to perhaps nuance it a little bit. Say when the United States or the American administration imposed sanctions on Syria, um, or on other countries, or on Russia. Um, and many European companies used to work with Russia and Venezuela and Syria. And all of a sudden, we heard that these European countries, under American pressure, stopped dealing with Russia, Syria, Venezuela, etc., because they were threatened by the American administration to end economic agreements. So there must be an economic factor in Europe, official Europe or economic Europe, following the American foreign policy or being submissive to it, no?
yes, uh, I mentioned very shortly, but I mentioned well the extraterritoriality of the American laws. That's very powerful tool and weapon that is commonly used. You talked about the sanctions against Syria, against Russia, against many other countries. In fact, I think that most of the countries in the world are under sanctions by the United States of America, willing or unwilling, but they are under sanctions. That's the reason why they try to keep out of range of those sanctions, and well, they are not, they are obliged, they feel obliged to uh, follow the American orders because they fear, well, the results or the impacts of the American sanctions. Because I think that even if you have a dollar in your pocket, if you want to buy a sandwich and you have one piece of one piece of beef in your sandwich that is American, for example, the United States are able to make to complain against you and to have sanctions on you. That's what, of course, that we call the extraterritoriality of the norms, the rules, and that
Okay,
is,
so
of course, unlike against the international law, but they don't care about the international law. That is the reason why they prefer their own rules and values and systems. And for example, all the conflicts that I mentioned, all the rules, those countries, hundreds of, I think that we have most of the countries in the world, maybe 120 countries, are under sanctions by the United States of America for the time being.
you
So,
see, Ambassador, many many think, or there is a school of thought that actually does not too much endorse the love affair or the place and position of love in international relations. It's not about being in love with the American way of life. It's about economic interest, which we have now dealt with somehow. And some scholars argue that, in fact, the presence of the Israel lobby or the Zionist lobby, which is very active in the EU as well as in America, is in fact the glue which brings the official EU under the wings of the United States. But if we depart slightly from the economic paradigm and we go to another factor, to what extent, in your opinion, after nearly 80 years, do European officials feel the guilt feeling with regards to what some European regimes perpetrated against European Jews? Is it still present, or is it just propaganda are they still, do you think, under the guilt feeling towards the Jews and therefore transferring it to the current state of Israel, which nobody knows its current boundaries? So if we weigh the economic factor with the guilt factor, which one do you think is overwhelmingly present, and which one is at all real?
Oh, but in asking the question, I think that you brought the answer. But because of course, from the economic viewpoint, there is no any intelligence in this. It is not very clever to take this position for the economic for the governments to take these positions. They perfectly knows that all their position in favor of Israel and in favor and sticking up to the U.S. position is not realistic and is well against their national interest. They do that, but I think that they feel they are accustomed to take positions well in conformity with the U.S. positions in all the fields, and so why not? But as regards the guilt, I think it is still present. I think they are afraid to have to give any notion or any idea that there could be just a drop or two drops of anti-Semitism, for example, that can be confused, that can be assimilated to anti-Zionism. It's written in the national laws in many countries, and there is a strong pressure to make it a system in all the Western countries, the European countries, that Zionists, but to be against the Zionist regime is to be against the Jews. And it remains, of course, it recalls very bad performances of European countries during World War II. I think that it is still present, it seems it's very far away. It's before the partition plan and before the creation of Israel. But I think that the genocide, the Holocaust, is still very present in the minds of many generations, of many in the subconscious of many Europeans, especially of Germany. Of course, there are many reasons to be so. I do understand, but even other countries. I will mention, for example, unfortunately, some countries that are closer to my heart than
Yeah.
Germany.
So
But it's a factor. So I think it's a kind of glue on this fear and this resentment and this remembrance is a glue for the is a glue for the between the European and between Israel and between the United States. The United States, of course, have a lot of responsibility, but in the World War II, but against the Soviet Union, not for the Jews, especially. While I think that in many European countries and in Western Europe, where the Jews were hardly persecuted by the Nazi regimes, and some governments that decided during World War II to collaborate with the German regime, with the Nazi regimes. And it was the case, of course, for what we used to call the French states of Vichy. This is the reason why, and it remains in the collective memory, in the collective mind, and it's very difficult to uproot this this bad impression, this guilt
Ambassador,
feeling.
yeah, Ambassador, you have served in the Arab world as well as in Africa. May I ask you, based on your knowledge, experience, and of course insight, reading all these internal communiques, what, in your opinion, are the strengths of the Arab world? What kind of strong points does the Arab world have? This is A. And B, what of these points, if they exist, can be used to support the Palestinian plight and cause, and what have been used and what haven't been used, and why?
Uh, for the first part of your question, well,
what are the strengths of the Arab world?
Ah, I think that I don't know for the other European countries, but for France, of course, it's obviously the colonization. And in terms of colonization, of course, Palestine is one case, a typical case. We have, of course, France was very present, not only during the colonization times, but had strong relations with well, Middle East and well, Eastern countries, the Middle East and Northern Africa. And more recently, of course, as you know, the Northern Africa from the Maghreb to Algeria and Tunis, and well, the France was very present as colonizers. And I think that it created relations, especially the Algerian situation, starting from 1830 to 1962 until the independence. There was, of course, there was a colony and colonizer. France was the colonizer of Algeria, and so with the human presence of well, colonizers in Algeria, 1 million people, for example, that well, settlers that settled in Algeria since the well, past century, from the 1820 until well the last century. And I think that this presence of 1 million people and right after the independence of Algeria, you had a big movement of immigrant migrations from Algeria to France. Generally speaking, well, from all the colonized countries, the previous colonies to France, of course, you have a human presence in France, but especially from Northern Africa and from Algeria. And I think that the Algerian case that have some common points with the situation in Israel and Palestine. You have some common points, obviously, and I think that it creates an image, and that is very important. Of course,
But
why
Ambassador,
on the second,
sorry, Ambassador. What I meant in my question, the first question, is to ask you what are the strong points that the Arab world have in order to perhaps support the Palestinian cause. Now, you mentioned the presence of Algerian community in France. Did you mean to say that the Algerian or Arab communities in Europe can be a strong points and they aren't?
they are a strong point, but in favor of the friendship or against, well, the serenity of the relations between the two countries, I don't know. It depends on the people. But anyway, I think that in the imagination of many, many people for the time being, and taking into account what happens in Palestine, for example, I think that what happens, well, remembers what happened between France and Algeria at the time of independence, and the exodus of 1 million people, all of a sudden after independence. There was an agreement, of course, before independence in 1962, and this agreement did not plan well any exodus of the European or the French settlers in Algeria. But what happened in the reality is that in 1 year, most of the settlers, the European settlers, French or other nationalities, Well, most of the settlers did leave the country, and very, very quickly. And so it gives the impression what could happen in Palestine, for example, in Israel. It could happen in case of, as I hope, the Palestinians to win the war. Finally speaking, I think that it could be some signals of what could happen in in, the, in Palestine. I think this is in the French public opinion, and that's inspiration. We think that between the settlers, between the Algerians living in France, between the migrants, all the contacts, all the soldiers that served in the French army in Jazair and in Algeria, there we had up to 500,000 French soldiers serving in Algeria for some times. So it is a lot of people. And so you have all those kinds of links between the two um, sides of the Mediterranean that creates a very deep links for the good and for the better and for the world.
But
But
but if I ask you, have Arab communities in Europe, say in France or Germany
yes,
or elsewhere, have they used their presence in order to influence foreign policy with regards to Palestine or not?
I don't. I am not sure what I say about the people's the popular movement in favor of the Palestinian problem. For the time being, was very surprising, but it's not news. It was 40 years ago, for example, there was a movement in the youth. It was uh, it was not specific to the immigration youth, but uh, but uh, but the young people and in general, among the students, among the young generation, among the leftist power, the leftist parties. It was a traditional cause of solidarity with Palestine against the state of Israel, against the Zionist state. But it disappeared for the 40 years, all along 40 years of evolutions, it disappeared. It is appearing, surging again and again in the public opinion of right now. I was quite surprised. For example, I went to some demonstration in favor of the Palestinian cause this year, some weeks ago in Paris. And there was a crowd. I had never seen such a crowd in the streets of Paris. It was in favor of the Palestinian cause. And I think I was stricken by the fact that it resembles like two drops of water to what happened, used to happen in the, 40 years ago. So it's a recreation of some wave of enthusiasm, simple solidarity with the Palestinian cause in among the young people in France, not especially among Algerians or the Arabs, the communities. I am not sure the role of the, we have uh, millions and millions of people that are coming from the Arab countries or Muslim countries. I think that we have 7, 8, or 9 million people who are living in France. Of course, they create a pressure. They are not a lobby, properly speaking, but they are creating by their mere existence and the presence in France, they are creating a pressure on the government and on the public opinion. They have relation, bad or good, with public opinion. And I think that you have among the more nationalistic trends among the political parties in France, we have some parties, the ultra rightist party, for example, of course, they are in favor of a return to the French sovereignty, national sovereignty against the European Unions and well, against the United States, but at the same time, the national sovereignty. But for them, the great obstacle to the national sovereignty is not sticking up to the American policy or sticking up to Israel. It is the presence of those Arab or Islamic presence in France. That is the problem for the ultra-right, the rightist parties. This is the great problem. And they're talking about the theory that the big replacement, le grand remplacement, the big replacement. It means a new population that could take place of the French native population. That's a a point, very powerful point of propaganda, and it has some impact on the public opinion that is ignorant, that is not very cultivated.
Ambassador, may I kindly ask you? We know that some Arab countries are rich. And many ask ask in the media, why haven't these rich Arab states not used their economic power, at least, in order to help the Palestinians, or at least to stop the current ongoing genocidal war against the Gaza Strip? I mean, some people are not providing answers, others seem not to know. But as an expert yourself, Your Excellency, and you are also a speaker of Arabic, and you know Arab politics, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and culture, why do you think these rich Arab states did not so far use their economic power, like, say, they used it in 1973 when they declared the oil embargo? Why haven't they used it now in order to stop an ongoing genocide?
But I don't know. That is my question also. That I have no answer. I could imagine. We could imagine that. Of course, we remember what happened after the Ramadan War in the autumn
73.
1973. What happened when they use, for example, the oil price to sustain the Arab cause, and they took the opportunity of increasing highly it was the first stage of the pricing of the cost of the oil. But this time we were expecting, some people and some observers that have an historical memory were well expecting that the Arab government, some Arab countries would help the Palestinian cause in taking this decision. But there was no movement. I am not sure. In general, that is my surprise. That is not my answer. That is my surprise. I wonder why you had the silence of all the Arab countries except Jazair, for example, in Algeria, because you have close link between the two countries due to history, the common history to the two countries, and the immigration of the Qadr family to Syria. You have links, and some, maybe a couple of Syria is not in a capacity to to help very, very strongly, military speaking, Palestine. But I think that for Syria, it is the most important cause issue that could exist in the region, because Palestine is a kind, to some extent, in the minds of many Syrians, of many people in the regions, a part of Syria that was taken out by force at the time of colonialism from Syria. But Syria is not has to defend itself, and it's one of the parts of the acts of resistance. But expecting the situation under sanctions and the embargo and so on and so on. But I think that for the other country, the rich country, for Saudi Arabia, I don't know what they are playing as a game, because at the same time there is some kind of some kind of approximation of maneuvers with Russia and China, for example, the rapprochement with reconciliation with Iran, and so many diplomatic and political maneuvers within, well, the old order. I think that they are changing their position. Anyway, they are getting farther and further from the American policy. It is true for the Saudi Arabia, for example. I don't think that the Quincy Treaty is still well valid between the two countries. I think that they are taking many steps that, well, take them longer and longer, farther and farther from America than they were. But we have also the Emirates. I don't know. I don't understand what they do and what they don't do. The Ibrahimic, of course, agreements. I never understood what was the roots of this, which interest they could have in signing and pushing other states to sign those Ibrahimic agreements. That is, well, in favor of the United States and in favor of Israel. But I never understood what an intellectual mechanism, if intellect we can speak of, I never understood. And so I cannot understand for the time being. I note that there is a mediation between Qatar. Qatar is a small state that has not many existence, in fact, out of money and support to some movements. But I think that they try to intervene, they try to take place in the political field and in the diplomatic field in the Middle East. But I think that it is successful or not. I don't understand. You have 4 countries that signed the peace agreement and normalization agreement with Israel. And the Sudan, that was the country of the three no, the Arab nose to Israel at well in remote times. The Maghreb, Morocco was king, is the chairman of the Al Quds committee, and were a descendant of the prophet. I don't know, I don't realize, I don't understand very well how it came to take this position, well, in favor of reconciliation, normalization to Israel. It is very far away from Israel. He has no practical interest, but he has an ideological interest to be close to the West, to France, or to I don't know what. But anyway, that's a mechanism that escapes from my comprehension. I don't know. I am not very sure. But do have, obviously, I think that for the time being, for the internal problem as regards France, that the Arab community or the Muslim community are very, very prudent in their approach because they have some experience and they know the state of spirit in the French public opinion among the intellectual, among the political parties and all the sectors of the Western societies. And they feel that in the present situation, the best thing they can do is to remain silent, more or less, and to bring support to some sectors of the public opinion, to the young generations, for example, that are in favor of the Palestinian cause. It's a big and good surprise, but to be very prudent as far as the rest of the situation is concerned, not to take pressure. They know that they constitute a lobby, in fact, de facto lobby, but that this de facto lobby is not appreciated by the rest of the population, and so that they must be very prudent. That's what I understand. But
Okay,
anyway,
yeah, Ambassador, if I may please, we have discussed the European stance with regards to Palestine, followed by a discussion about the stance of the Arab or Islamic world with regards to Palestine. But many experts talk about the lack of influence that one could have expected from Russia and China. We received a question saying, why didn't Russia and China do more in order to try to stop this genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, especially that President Putin had very interesting, I'm being cautious, interesting, intriguing relations with Netanyahu himself, who is orchestrating and perpetrating this genocide.
Dr. Makram, I do agree with you. It is one of my questions. Well, my own questions about China and Russia. Of course, they can do more. I think that I understand the situation and their position about Syria, for example. I am quite sure, and we can explain their, for the time being, their position, their stance. Because at first, as regards Russia, of course, Russia has is entertaining another war against Ukraine that is very important and very dangerous for its mere existence. And I think, but I am convinced that well, Russia couldn't, in any case, drop Syria, its support to Syria, because it's the main point, strategic point of their policy, of their position in the Middle East. And if they abandon Syria, defeated, and well, um, I think that it would be a catastrophe, a political, geopolitical catastrophe for Putin and for Russia. I don't understand. As far as Palestine is concerned, I think that the relationship between Putin and Israel is very complicated. We have many reasons. I wrote some articles and think many things about that matters. I try to understand it, some of my books and so of my articles. But I think that the interest of Russia, the interest of Russia and of Putin, especially as being the leader, the Russian president for Israel, has many roots. At first, the presence, the fact that you have over 1 million of Israeli citizens that are coming from Russia. They were expelled. They left the Soviet Union, but instead of going, well, most of them came to Israel. And you have a Russian speaking minority in Israel that is very important, over 1 million people, I think, and it's a very important part of the population in Israel, and it's a strong link with the rest of the Jewish community in Russia, and they cannot ignore it. I think, secondly, that Putin has this war in Ukraine that is the ongoing war in Ukraine that is very dangerous for Russia, strategically speaking. And I think that Russia doesn't want, for the time being, to be present and to be involved and deeply involved in a second war. Russia and Putin, specifically the Russian president, knows that uh, he is involved, whether he wants or not, but he is involved in the war between Palestine and Israel. And he knows that he is well observed and strongly observed by all the international community. I am not sure that he knows what to do exactly. And I think that he tries to save time for the time being. If, but of course, as psychologically speaking, it is very, very difficult to understand. For China, China is very bad. It's not very bad. It's very far away from China. It's very active. She, for example, she showed a lot of interest for President Assad when inviting and friend luxury and protocol in China. China is helping many, many countries in the region, but I think that it depends. It depends on the Russian opinion at the same time. China was due was well the incentive to China to get into to get interested into the Middle East problem was through the Russian views. The Russian, yes. I think that in Syria, for example, on the other, about Palestine, I'm not sure that the Chinese government has a very clear opinion of the problem. It's very far away. Finally speaking, uh, uh, for the time being, it is quite clear that China is involved in every problem, big or small, interesting or not interesting in the region or in the whole world, because China has upsurged as one of the superpowers in the world. And so it must take a position on everything. I think that China is in the rear front of the axis of resistance for the time being. In
Yeah.
the last minute, it could intervene. But for the time being, I think that it prefers to leave the Russian partner to have its appreciation. And the Russian partner is not very clear. That is right.
Yeah.
I suppose that they are not, of course, in favor. They have a very complicated relation with Israel. Hmm?
Yeah,
Finally
I
speaking,
understand, Ambassador. Of course, we understand that there are complexities, as you have kindly mentioned. Um, And certainly, we do recognize at least the historicity of the positions of the former Soviet Union and China with regards to the Palestinian cause. Verbally and officially, they have definitely been supportive of the Palestinian cause. But when push comes to shove, as we say in English in England, we see that not only China and Russia, as well as the EU and even the Arab world and the Islamic world, but not the resistance front. All the rest, it seems, have not been helpful. And if I may quote one um, leading Palestinian ambassador, the distinguished ambassador Afif Safia, who said, "We are being left alone." Or in Arabic, we say, "Ya wahdana, ya wahdana." So perhaps you could explain to me one thing. If we have now scanned all these global arenas and the geopolitics, which in fact, if to use emotional description, they have let down the last vanguard nation fighting for its liberation, independence, and even existence. Now, if we could just leave all of the political actors, could you tell me if the last, perhaps, venue, which is the ICJ or Criminal Court of Justice or The Hague, etc., do you think that there is a chance that this body could, in fact, be more professional, more just towards the Palestinian cause, or will it as well be under the spell and the influence of those players who have been influencing other cases?
oh, I think that we talked about the Arab country. It was a surprise that you see that the Arab countries, whatever they are, with the mere exception of Algeria, the other Arab countries, including the closer one and Syria, excepted, didn't take any position in favor, they don't move just one finger in favor of the Palestinian cause.
By
Why?
the way, Ambassador, just to be totally say objective, if I may, just in order as well to have your take, let's or would it be fair to differentiate between, say, Syria, which expressed of course a supportive position towards the Palestinians, but it's very weak. At least five states occupy parts of its land, so it's economically weak, and it's under nearly weekly shellings and attacks by Israeli missiles, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is Jordan, who is also weak, but at least it took a public supportive position with regards to Palestine, be it by the Queen, the King, the government, let alone the biggest demonstrations nearly with Yemen in the Arab world. So, and Yemen as well. So we need to kind of sort of deconstruct this. But what I meant to ask you about, those countries or states who could have made the difference, and let's spell it out, those Gulf sheikdoms who, with a lot of wealth and natural resources, who could have made a difference, but chose not to be heavy-handed and to impose on America or the Israeli occupation this sort of decisions, or to stop the genocide. If please correct me if I misunderstood you, or if you've got a different opinion.
Dr. Makram, I am sure I want to repeat that, of course, I know perfectly that it's a genocide. And I have no doubt about that. It's a genocide that is openly perpetrated by the Israeli government. And all the international community does know that, all the countries in the world. It is not possible to ignore that there is a genocide in Palestine. That, of course, what you say about China, for example, and about Russia is true. But at first, I have no, personal, nobody has an explanation. I think that many people do ask themselves the questions, why, the reason why, would like to know the reason why Russia and China don't intervene more closely, even through taking a position, or expressing their opinion over the genocide. I think that it is obvious that it is a genocide, but I have no explanation, in fact. I think, and they are right in this matter, that America, for the time being, is shouldering two big wars. The first one is in Ukraine. The second one is in Palestine. As it was said in my intervention or in the message of Joe Biden, the United States are supporting Israel and Zelensky. Those are two important words, and they don't intervene. They don't want to intervene in itself as America. They are proxy, the proxy intervention. They have elite forces and people that are on the ground and present, and their allies and proxies and support. But you have no American army, not one American soldier. You have not one American soldier in Ukraine, and not one American soldier in Palestine, in Gaza, for the time being anyway. And I think that for Russia, it is very important. There is quite a silent agreement, but a real agreement between the two, a non-said agreement between the two countries, between the American government and the Russian government, that we have no direct intervention. If you intervene directly and sending your soldiers, your military directly, American, US, not through the tanks or I don't know what, but through soldiers, men, and openly we can intervene. But as far and as long as you have no American soldiers on the field, so Russia doesn't feel free to send and to intervene and to have a declaration. To declare what? To declare that they are supporting the Yes, of course, against the genocide, but I think that it is, well, you don't need, for some countries would need to stress the point that they are against genocide. I think that a country like Russia doesn't need to do so. I think that they suffer a real genocide during World War II. I think close to 30 million people that were genocided by the, and so they have the experience of what genocide is. They cannot be well suspected to be well in favor of a genocider. But the United States, yes, because they didn't move their thumb fingers during World War II until the last minute in order to see Russia crushed by the German army, and that until the last minute they didn't intervene. I think that there is not for Russia. It's maybe, of course, it would be. I don't see how Russia could do, Putin could do to what he could say in favor of the Palestinian cause. He could say that we are against the genocide, but he couldn't say, well, let's we intervene and we help. Uh, because if he said that, well, the American side would send the soldiers. They do that, but they don't say anything. And I think that they want to maintain the next kind of balance between the two countries, between Russia and the United States. It's not, I am very conscious, it's not a very satisfactory explanation. It's not very satisfactory, even for myself. But
Right.
I think I try to just not to justify, but I try to explain Putin's positions. Putin doesn't talk a lot, like Biden that says everything. Everything that well gets out of his mouth is stupid and not very reasonable and very deep, very stupid. Putin, well, well, is calculates very closely his words and his speeches.
Right.
So
No,
I
I mean,
don't.
as you know, Ambassador, as the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies, we do not side by any side. Our mission is to educate the public in general, and certainly shed light using your experience and knowledge to shed light on issues that are really being discussed by so many experts, scholars, and the audiences. So we are trying to understand from you as much as we can. But if to shift from this paradigm, the global political paradigm, but not before, I think we mentioned that I think that President Putin mentioned or made a comparison between the siege of Leningrad and the siege of Gaza, and as well as even the head of the foreign policy of the EU recently said that the bombardment of Gaza is even similar or worse than the bombardment of Dresden or something along these lines. Whoever is interested can certainly check online the exact statements. But if we leave this aside and ask you one question about the chances, possibility, deployment, employment of the International Court of Justice or International Criminal Court. There are many initiatives now across the world aiming at taking Israeli leaders or the Israeli government to the criminal court. Do you think that this, obviously we do not know how the judges will behave, and we always, or I at least personally, I always say that the way social media cover the conflict does not mean that it will satisfy the judges at the court, because they operate in a different way. They need hard evidence, and they need to investigate things that we see, crimes that we see. Yes, we see crimes online, but then the court would like to have, all the elements, available to it. But from your point of view, as really one of the most senior European diplomats with a lot of insight in the last 3-4 decades, do you think that this time the ICJ will behave slightly differently, and not only take to court those who are weak in the African continent?
Yes, of course, if you're referring to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice, I think that both of them, of course, are under high control of the United States and of the West, the government, historically speaking. But I think that, well, the clearest case is the case of, if you talk about the International Criminal Court that was created, most recently. I think that according in its structures, in its history, taking into account its birth rates and its way of creation, I think that it was a kind of, satellite, a tool, a political tool for the United States and for the West, generally speaking. It was at the time of the unipolar American moment between 1991 and 2011, during the 30 years of the complete American hegemony. It was created at that period. And I think that obviously the International Criminal Court was created in the view of the American government, even though the United States refused to subscribe and to sign the Rome Treaty, the founding treaty, and they are not a member to the International Criminal Court, but they use the International Criminal Court is a part of the double standard or the double standard attitude. They don't do themselves, but they make do by other people, by proxy. But I think that evidently, if we take the first experiences and the first cases that were dealt with by the International Criminal Court, it is clear that this court was created in order to serve the American interest and the Western interest, but at first and firstly, and above anything else, above the American interest, and they serve the American interest. I think that all the international justice was a system that was created by the West and by the United States to help the American policy and the Western policy and the hegemony, or to serve the Western hegemony. It was the case for the International Court of Justice, but most recently, it was the clearest example, the International Court of Justice. And I think that the international justice in the general framework is not independent as any justice should be, but it's clearly closely dependent to the United States and to the West as the system of the United Nations as a whole. It's a tool of the Western world. It was true in all the organizations of the systems of the United Nations, except the Security Council, between this kind of the right of veto that was given to 5 big states inside the United Nations. It was the sole and the one example of independence, of possibility of independence in the decision-making process. Security Council. But all the rest, the General Assembly at first was to create a unanimity in favor of the West. It was true. It is not true anymore because the order of the world has changed. But at the very beginning, it was like that, to follow the Atlantic policy, the American policy. And every decision, the international justice was created in the same direction for the same goal. For example, the first, we take Milosevic. Milosevic was not a war criminal, but he was arrested by the criminal court and put to trial and was imprisoned. And so he died, and there was nothing of the accusation that was true. He was accused very falsely, and but because it was the interest and the decision of the United States. The United States are not, I repeat, are not a member to the founding treaty of Roma, but they are they use as a tool, and a very important tool, the International Criminal Court as a tool for their policy, at the service of their policy, and they use it very, very often. And I think that the mandate they use through the United Kingdom, for example, that is also very useful. The order of helping the United States to serve their policy. I know, for example, that the new procureur, the procureur, how do you call it in English? I don't know. The procureur of the International Criminal Court is Imran Khan. He is a British citizen, but from Indian ascent, and he is a new, and he is to the British citizen, and I think that he is a servant and a deep servant and active servant of the U.S. policy, and I think that he made the warrant against President Putin. He was Imran Khan. That was
sorry, Ambassador. His name. Sorry, just to correct. His name is Karim Khan. Karim Khan, and he's the yes. and he's the prosecutor.
He's the prosecutor. I was looking. I was seeking the right name. The prosecutor. Yes, and but he was the prosecutor, the first one that sent a mandate warrant against President Putin. It's not a mere chance. It was just calculated, for example. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I think that President Putin hardly should participate in any actions with the International Criminal Court. He has a warrant, arrest warrant against its position, and so he cannot do. But in fact, I think that even if he could do, I'm not sure that he would do it. But not in
Ambassador, it's been truly fascinating having this dialogue with you. In the last 5 minutes of this 2-hour session, could I kindly ask you the following? Given the fact that we moved from a unipolar system to a multipolar system, I understood from what you have kindly said in the last 2 hours that regional conflict resolutions have not benefited much from this shift from unipolar to a multipolar, but it may well be that helped maintain these conflicts and block to a certain extent American hegemony. But since this program, this session, this episode is in particular about Palestine, May I kindly ask you, perhaps, this, we are approaching the end of the year 2023 and at the beginning of 2024, and sometimes these are questions that fortune tellers are asked. So my question to you is, without talking about several decades ahead, my question is simple. Where do you see Palestine and the Palestinians only in 7 years from now, in 2030?
I think, yes, I think that one point that is very, very important is the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Palestine cannot be separated and taken apart. The general change in the globe, in the shift in the global world order. For me, it's very, very important. And I cannot imagine that anything can happen that is getting against this tendency, the global trend, in the global shift in the world order, from the unilateral Atlantic order to the, let's say, Eurasian order, for the collective West on the one side, under the leadership of the United States, and on the other side, well, the global South, guided by Eurasia, Russia, China, Iran, and so on, so on, so on. And I think that in this context, every country in the world is must choose his his side, must takes sides, or the West or the South. I think that as regards Palestine, there is some singularity that at first, for the time, it's not a recognized state because it never happened until now. It is one root of the problems, but I don't know if it is a good solution. But secondly, I think that for the Arab countries and the Muslim country in general, this is the dubious part of the game, that many of them, including many Arab countries and the Arab country in general, with very few exceptions, have not chosen clearly chosen their side, or the South or the West. And this is very important for the global change. The global shift, the ongoing global shift is getting very, very, very quickly. We cannot imagine the situation that is not the balance between the two parts of the world, 10% in the West and 19% in the South. That's not a balance, it's unbalanced anyway. And we couldn't imagine that it would be like that, with a quite rebellion against the United States and the Western countries. It cannot be imagined, it couldn't be imagined even 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We could say, or we should have said that, yes, it is changing, and 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the global order of the world will have changed. It is not the case for the time being. I think that the situation that we witness for this year, at the end of this year, couldn't be imagined even a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. So it is changing very quickly. The conflict in Palestine, I wish, and I'm sure that the Palestine will win against what is visible for the time being. I am quite sure of that. It cannot, because I think that even the Arab countries that are were very slow to choose their camp, their side. But I think that step by step they are changing and taking their new position. It's the case for Saudi Arabia. It's the case for other countries that try to make a balance between the two sides. But I think that definitely they feel that the final solution will be to join the other camp, the camp of Eurasia, the global south. And I think that Saudi Arabia is doing so under the leadership of Ben Salman. It was not to be to be foreseen, but that's what happened. For other, even the Emirates or Qatar or all the Arab countries, Egypt are taking, step by step, are taking their steps, including through the BRICS Treaty, that is the new framework from the Global South. And I think that, of course, it doesn't help Palestine in the day-by-day not routine conflict. But anyway, I think that for the final solution of the conflict in Palestine, between Israel and Palestine, that Palestine will win. I am quite sure. And of course, and I bet, saying that, I bet on the global shift, that is the ongoing global shift, that is, getting very, very, very quickly, and more quickly than we could imagine very recently. I think Ukraine was felt and described in the Western media, the newspapers, and by all the mainstream media, the intellectual politicians, were considered as being as lost by Russia from the first day. It was a lie. It is not true. Russia has won from it is not written on the peace treaty, but obviously Ukraine has lost. I think that on the same way, because the two conflicts are linked, as our friend Joe Biden said, that the two conflicts of Ukraine and Palestine are joined, Israel has joined, I think that Israel will not win. It will lose the conflict, even against the Palestinian, not alone. It's not cruelty. I am quite conscious that many Palestinians, it's a, it, the Zionist leaders do behave, and they are monsters. I think that their way of behaving, of talking, of treating the Palestinians, of caring the solution or the no solutions, the bombing, the shelling, the massacre, the killing, all that is witnessed under the eyes of the international community at large. And every day, even on this photograph that I see in your back, I think that it's they are monsters, and I think that they won't win anyway. I don't think that they are able to. They have not won. I say when I said that I don't want to refer to myself, it's not a good reference, but I think that finally you have a big army, a powerful army, that is the Israeli army, doesn't win. Obviously, they are not winning. They have not reached any political and deep result in Palestine for the time being.
Ambassador, thank you very much for this.
It means that they are not winners, and in front of them you have the resistance. They are resisting, and they are winning. And so I think that the victory, the winner, the final winner, will be Palestine, and that's what all the strategists have as a conclusion to this situation. An army that doesn't win loses, is a loser, and the resistance that resists is the winner. And so Palestine will win. And of course, maybe you won't believe me, But, well, as I said,
I am not here to believe or disbelieve,
when the
to
ICC
listen.
wakes up, but when the axis of good has lost the game, I do believe much more strongly on losing the game by the axis of good than, well, the waking up of the ICC. But let's hope so. We have many actions that are on the way. As you know, we have one big action, for example, that gathers together over 600 or 700 advocates, lawyers, international lawyers of all nationalities, and well, maybe 200 NGOs and associations are together, and a number of responsible in different fields, intellectuals, writers, lawyers, etc., etc., and they are part of the piece of the initiative to the International Criminal Court. And I think that the dossier was opened by the the persecutor, and so prosecutor. I think that it's a good omen. But well, of course, let's for the Palestinians. I think that there will be. I think that the government of Israel is under the eyes of the international community, and they are not very sympathetic eyes to the Israeli policy. I think that they are considered as being monsters, and I think that Israel, for the future, will be in a very delicate situation. They will have to choose their solution, and a peaceful solution, which solution is the best for the country. We have, finally, we talk of the apartheid state. It's the state of apartheid in which the genocide is being fermented. And I think that, well, putting an end to the apartheid could be the good solution for all the people that accept to live in Palestine under the legality and justice. That is my hope, in fact, finally.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Michel Raimbaud, for sharing with us your very important and intriguing thoughts, opinions, understandings, and explanations. I'm sure that this episode will act as an educational section in our program that many will be watching, learning, and reflecting on what you have said. So it, as always, it's been an honor and a pleasure to be having you with us. We do hope that the new year will bring to all of us joy and peace and health nonetheless. Many thanks and have a great weeks ahead. Many thanks, Your Excellency, Ambassador Michel Raimbaud, and I thank you, obviously, on behalf of myself and as well as on behalf of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies, which is running this series. Thank you very much and stay well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Makram. I was pleased and honored to attend and to take part in this very interesting meeting and conference. And I took a lot of your time. I'm very grateful to have invited me to this session. And of course, I wish you a good year, a new happy Christmas. And to Palestine, I dare not wish a happy Christmas to Palestinians, but I hope very friendfully and artfully, well, all the success to the Palestinian strike. I am sure that they will win because it's a just cause, and I am sure that finally they will be the winners of this monstrous conflict, genocide. It is a genocide. Happy New Year.
Just to clarify, perhaps to our audiences, I know what you meant when you said, I do not wish Palestinians, in other words, you are not congratulating because all
Because they were in every
yeah, all Christmas celebrations have been cancelled in Palestine. So I understand what you mean.
Oh, yes, of course. There is no, yes, there is no misunderstanding, of course. Huh?
Yeah.
I don't, I dare not say, well, have a good year, because I think that it would be quite stupid from my part. But I wish them, well, a happy, anyway, a good new year, a good year 2024. I am sure that the conflict will be ended and that they will be the winner, and because they deserve it. They have good, they have said, they have played, they have given a good, a perfect example of what resistance means, what courage means. And so
Thank you
my
very much.
congratulations to the Palestinian people, and vive la Palestine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.